If there's one thing Germans know, if there's one thing that Germans can teach other people, is that democracy and the rule of law can never be taken for granted. It's breakable.
My name is George Cheung, and I'm an advocate for racial justice and equity in the United States, with an aim on improving our electoral system. One important thing that we're really focused on is dismantling the winner-take-all electoral system, because at its core, it's majoritarian. It doesn't give a voice to any minority, be it people of color, or low-income people, or renters. It feels like our government doesn't truly represent us. So what if the problem isn't who we're voting for, but how we're voting? To explore that question, I'm traveling around the globe to other countries to learn how they elect their leaders and what we can learn from their experiences. It is Election Day in Australia. Welcome to Ireland. Election Day here in Canada.
Ladies and gentlemen, you are on board a Democracy World Tour.
Today, we're in a country that has a very different way of doing it, Germany. It is election night in Germany.
Today was the federal election in Germany, where we elected the Bundestag, our parliament, and we watched the results together.
You could feel that the election was very much like the one we just had in the US. High stakes, a rising authoritarian grouping, and it's under stress, that's for sure.
You might think, why Germany? Seems like an odd choice. What can we in the US, particularly people of color, learn from a country that's fairly homogenous, uses a parliamentary system, and has a dark history? Well, actually, quite a bit, and it's precisely because of that history. So how does German democracy and its electoral system actually work? How do they elect their representatives? Germany is really interesting because they essentially established a different system of proportional representation. It's called mixed member proportional. You get 2 votes.
The system of 2 votes?
Yes.
Can you explain that to us?
Easily to say, the first voice is for a person I like.
The first vote is for, just like in the US, a single winner district. You check a box for one candidate.
And the second voice is to elect a party which presents what I think.
Each legislative district throughout Germany elects a representative with the first vote using a simple first-past-the-post system, meaning the candidate with the most votes in that district gets sent to parliament, no matter their party affiliation. Then, and this is the unique part, after the local winners are seated, additional members from each party list are added or subtracted, so the final parliament reflects the party vote established by the second vote. But in this phase, only those parties with over 5% of the vote, or at least 3 direct district seats, get seated in the parliament. This is what's known as the 5% threshold. Bottom line, if 14% of German voters pick, let's say, the Green Party, then 14% of the parliament will be made of Green Party members. And yet all citizens still have a local member of parliament that represents their community. This effectively slays the gerrymandering dragon, ensuring that all votes count, not just in swing states, but everywhere.
If you have a parliament, you also need a representative you know, because it all begins and ends with trust and people. So we have a split system. You have half of the Bundestag are the representatives. It's about 300 people. They're elected directly. And then you have another about 300 people which are then inserted to form the parliament so that the proportional representation is there.
I like the system. We get two different votes. It's the Erststimme for a candidate, it's the Zweitstimme for a party. And I like the Zweitstimme more.
And that's what I like about the German election system, that you have that broad variety of parties.
The election system in Germany works, I think, quite well. Opposed, again, to USA, we don't have go this or that way, and we do have more than two options. It makes it harder, though, to really go into one direction and push through, which is also out of our history has been a decision to form it like that. So it's more about compromise and it's more about finding common ground.
The Germans have built this thing on the ashes of the world's worst system ever, and they were pretty careful about what they did.
Coming to Germany, you might think that this is a very old country, but it's not. Before 1871, Germany was a patchwork of kingdoms, duchies, and nations like Bavaria and Prussia.
There is no German Paris. There is no German London, by which I mean one central dominating capital city that's always been at the center of the country. Berlin emerged centuries later. And in understanding Germany and the kind of the German mind, it's important to understand that German identity evolved in a very fragmented way. Local identity, regional identity, has always been important here. Welcome to the land of the 1,800 varieties of sausage.
So imagine if New York, California, and Texas decided to come together to form the United States. That is essentially Germany's story.
America perceives Germany as homogenous one people. Is that accurate?
No, that's not accurate. There has always been a lot of migration from Italy, Turkey, Portugal, and so on into the German workforce.
Zwei Doner Kebab, bitte?
Chicken or beef, my friend?
Ein mit chicken.
One chicken, one beef?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Or one lamb? Do you have lamb?
That is lamb.
Okay, thank you.
And we have now maybe roughly a quarter to a third of people who have some sort of migration background in current day Germany.
Lecker. Really, the main question for the night and for the next several days is who will form the governing coalition? In other words, which party will control the German government, which means appointing ministers, department heads, and so on. That honor falls to the party that holds a majority of seats in parliament, 50% plus one or more. And since that is usually not a single party, it often requires two or more parties to form a governing coalition, a partnership that will run the government. And those coalition negotiations can often take weeks after an election before a government is established.
Yeah, the forming of the government, you have to come, when you look at the seats that we have in the government, or in the parliament, then you have to get half of those seats. And we have to figure out first who or which party accomplishes how many of those seats. We don't know yet because we have this hurdle of 5%, and there are at least two parties that are right below this threshold.
Under the German electoral system, it's very likely that there's a major party that has to form coalitions with one or more other parties. And so from the get-go, there's constant negotiation to figure out what makes the most sense in terms of representing the most opinions in German society.
The First World War, the Great War, the turning point in modern European history. When that war came to an end, Europe was wrecked. One of the most severely affected countries at the end of the First World War was Germany. Germany simply fell into absolute chaos. On the 9th of November, realizing it was all over, the Kaiser ran, fled Berlin, and in his absence, politicians in Berlin proclaimed a new republic, the first democracy in German history.
Germany, their first elections happened under the Weimar Republic after World War I. And they set up a system that tried to bring in as many people as possible because this was their first attempt at building a real democracy. And so they had a proportional system that had no threshold. Basically, if you got enough for one seat, you would take that seat. And that seems, on one hand, good in terms of lots of people were represented, but in fact, it splintered. It allowed for an extremist like Hitler to come in and seize power, and we know what happens after that.
It's the most famous beer hall in all of Germany. It's the cathedral of German beer. Munich is the hometown of beer halls, beer gardens, beer cellars, beer everything.
Down here in Bavaria, it's like the Texas of Germany. They have a strong regional identity, a bit of rebellious spirit, and they love their big hats and big drinks.
We have a good beer. Come in Germany and try Bavarian beer.
Prost.
Traditionally, all cultural, social life in this city takes place in beer halls. You could go to the communist beer hall, go to the conservative beer hall, go to the liberal beer hall. Everybody had their own beer hall. So you got whatever reality you wanted to hear about, depending on what beer hall you were drinking in. Kind of the social media of 1920s. Germans first began to hear of the name Adolf Hitler with him speaking in here. He proved to be a very, very powerful, charismatic beer hall demagogue. If you read his speeches, nothing makes sense. But if you were there, endless accounts of ordinary Germans saying, I went in the beer hall, I heard Hitler speak, oh my God. Suddenly I feel part of something. It's all making sense again. February 1920, posters appeared all around Munich, advertising a meeting that would take place in here. The meeting that night was the official birth date of the Nazi Party. Berlin was the seat of government, but Munich was always the official capital of the party, and it was the seat of Nazism.
Just a short walk from the Hofbrauhaus is a site of the bloody 1923 Beer Hall Putsch, Hitler's first attempt to seize political power. This unsuccessful coup lands Hitler in prison for treason. He is sentenced to 5 years, but only serves 9 months. Under the Weimar Republic, Germany used a list system. So you didn't vote for individuals, you just voted for a political party. And the threshold for a political party to enter parliament was extremely low.
It's important to recognize that the proportional system that Germany uses now is very different from the proportional system before Hitler that allowed Hitler to come to power. There's a 5% threshold in order to seat someone in the legislature. So a party has to get 5%. In the days of Hitler, there was not that 5% floor, and as a result, you have, over a dozen small political parties that can just be run over.
Does the threshold waste votes? Yes, it does, but you have to have a threshold. It's like a market of ideas. You have to have at least so many people that find these ideas good. And if not, okay, you can try next time. So yes, of course, some votes are wasted, but much less votes are wasted in comparison to the system where you only can choose your direct candidate.
I think what stood out to me in this trip was that a lot of what we learned about what led up to the atrocities of the Holocaust started off with law. It started off with, at the time, a bit of a democratic process.
After the Nazis had won the elections, the process of ending the democracy went quickly.
There's a fundamental weakness in democracy. Goebbels was very articulate on this point. It allows you to take it down from within.
Babelplatz is an oasis in an otherwise bustling city. In 1933, Nazis burned 20,000 books here.
The reason why we are stopping here and going to see this memorial, of course, has to do with what happened here in 1933. They didn't call it book burning, of course, no? We call it book burning. They called it action against the un-German spirit. It makes completely clear that there was one group that was going to define what was German and what was not. Because today, when we look back at the Weimar time, it seems like an incredible age, no, of such wealth, no, in all cultural aspects. No? And, well, they wanted to restore the German values and culture, and that was, of course, very general against everything that was progressive. So Heinrich Heine, no, in one of his works, he wrote this sentence, which is now written and part of the memorial. This was only a prelude. In a place where people burn books, they will in the end also burn people.
In order to understand the iron grip Hitler had on Germany, we're visiting the Nazi rally ground here in Nuremberg.
Nuremberg was important for the Nazis because they used it as a staging ground, as a rally ground, where they could create these mass gatherings. And that's exactly what the Nazis wanted to achieve here. They didn't want to convince people with good arguments, facts. They just wanted to impress people and by that win them over. The Congress Hall, which was never finished, is one of the examples, one of the buildings that we still have. Then we have the Zeppelin Field, so the place where Hitler stood and delivered his speeches, sometimes to up to 200,000 or even more.
Visiting here, you're just dwarfed by the size of these colossal structures. It truly is a testament to the effectiveness of the Nazis to use shock and awe to sway public opinion.
You have the capital of the party, which was Munich. You have the political center, which was Berlin. And here you had more the cult center, where they really lived the religious cult around Hitler. Nuremberg was the perfect setting to promote the idea that Nazis are a movement that the whole German people was part of.
And that is the source of German guilt today as much as anything else. They were not all Nazis, but they were a nation of passive spectators, basically. And today in Germany, they have developed this concept they call civil courage. This is, kids in school are taught, never be a spectator, never be a bystander.
A gorgeous villa with a deep, dark history. In 1942, Nazi leaders were summoned here based on a letter that said, let's decide what to do with the Jews and then have a nice breakfast. So it was here where the foundations of the Holocaust were determined. Today, this place is a museum that demonstrates that it wasn't just a few fanatics who were making these decisions. It was everyone. It was agencies, it was police forces, it was railways, all coordinating as part of their bureaucratic obligation.
We begin tonight with two big stories overseas. The elections tomorrow.
Yeah.
Are you planning on participating?
Yes, naturally. It's important because we are on a point of decision for the land, for Germany. And so everybody has to go to the election.
The most motivating thing about this election was to participate in the fight against the far-right parties like AfD.
This is Alice Weidel from the AfD speaking.
Fantastic election campaign. We did really well.
If the AfD are over 20%, it risks making the country ungovernable because you can't form a coalition without them and no one will go into coalition with them. And so everyone else will form a very incoherent, chaotic coalition with the AfD then owning all opposition politics. It's just an utter... And that's, by the way, what happened in the 1920s.
I was a professor at the university. I thought Nazis were crazy people, stupid fanatics. But unfortunately, it was not so. You see, they knew that they were not strong enough to conquer a unified country. So they split Germany into small groups. They used prejudice as a practical weapon to cripple the nation.
This part of Berlin has been described as a memorial landscape.
Biggest items that has stood out for me is just how active of a democracy it is here. It's almost like we're spectators and we're watching a show in the United States, whereas here it feels like people are immersed in it. It is a daily activity to reflect on democracy and hopefully strengthen it.
I think the remembrance culture here is very contradictory to the US. The amount of accountability really shows, and that is something to pay attention to.
They formed a little underground resistance committee known as the White Rose. The center of the White Rose was a brother and sister, Hans and Sophie Scholl. Not Sophie, she was 21. And what they did was they drew up flyers criticizing the Nazi regime and trying to encourage people to rise up and resist.
The kinds of radical political innovation, the kinds of instability.
Sophie was caught by the warden of Munich University distributing leaflets, and he seized her and handed her over to the Gestapo.
A lot of that we saw here is really reminiscent of what's going on in the United States while we're here.
And from that point, the outcome was never in doubt.
Germany's system of government was not an accident. Post-World War II, the Allies designed the system to prevent the type of democratic collapse that allowed Hitler to seize power. Nowhere is this post-war reckoning more evident than here in Nuremberg. In 1945 and 1946, the Allies convened the Nuremberg trials to prosecute high-ranking Nazi officials for war crimes and crimes against humanity.
That he knew for some time that Goering had failed, that he was corrupt, that he was a drug addict.
For Germans, it became very important because the Nuremberg trials were the moment when they first learned about the whole extent of the atrocities that were committed during World War II. The proof of the Holocaust. The basis for that was laid in this courtroom.
Everything that has happened during this trial, everything you have seen in the way of orders which were carried out without any hesitation, that is why this trial must contribute to the prevention of such distorted wars in the future.
And afterwards, it became the model for the International Criminal Court as we have it nowadays, and to hold people accountable for what they do as state leaders, as nation leaders. It became very important and very crucial for our modern history.
After World War II, Germany wasn't just defeated, it was divided.
I'm Carlos Meissner, I'm a tour guide, and we're here at Potsdamer Platz in Berlin, which is a major traffic node. In fact, the very first set of traffic lights that you see modeled just over there were installed here in 1924. Based on the first set of traffic lights on Times Square, New York. But the real history here, at least for us today, is that this is where the Berlin Wall used to run through. The East Berlin side, where the so-called death strip was over here. And on the other side was in many ways what was considered the end of the world when this was West Berlin.
Places like Checkpoint Charlie, a former crossing point between East and West Berlin, show how deeply divided this country was.
Ich bin ein Berliner.
I love Big Ship, are you kidding me?
Wow, the Trabant. That's really an icon. The GDR, the East German state, was struggling. For them, it was really important to offer their population something like the West Germans had already in the form of the Volkswagen Beetle. The the idea of a tiny car, just enough for the average family, and maybe 2 suitcases to go on holidays somewhere. This is how the Trabant was born.
For over 40 years, these two Germanys had completely different governments, economies, and cultures, separated by this wall.
My father, in 1961, was just 25 years old. I do know that he experienced the Berlin Wall being built and not being able to visit his cousins because they were literally on the other side of the wall. He never thought that he would live to see the day that the wall would come down.
Picture this, West Berlin, 1965. You and your family have been separated by the Berlin Wall. But actually, you're still allowed to visit them, as long as you exchange foreign currency. But you didn't cross through Checkpoint Charlie. You actually had to take a special train to this station here in Friedrichstrasse. Once you arrived, you would go through this labyrinth of checks and exit this door in order to be reunited with your family here in East Berlin.
In East Berlin, young families often wait years for a flat of their own. But once they have it, this small patch of concrete and sunlight becomes the center of their world.
What I perceived in school was a very strict system. And you had to sleep at a certain time and you had to do this in order to become the good communist, socialist citizen. The Stasi, this is something that I experienced more through my parents when they finally read their Stasi files and learned who spied on them, things like that.
The Stasi was a secret service of the GDR for the party in the East. The Stasi was the observation of the people.
From this very building, the Stasi built one of the most sophisticated surveillance networks in history. They bugged apartments, they steamed open mail, and they turned ordinary citizens into informants. Their ultimate goal, complete control of East Germany.
This is very interesting. Of course, they listened to the phone, right? So when we would, and you could hear it, you could hear the click once you started a conversation. So I remember this, and this is still the case with many older people who spend a significant amount of time in the GDR. They are just much more careful to talk about politics. So when I was a teenager, and I constantly wanted to talk about politics, and I remember my mother once saying, no, we can't discuss this on the phone. And then my answer was, you know what, the GDR is no longer there. We're done with that.
Hohenschönhausen is the former detention prison in the GDR. And now it is a memorial. We have about 500,000 visitors in a year. Many young people come here, school classes. It is important to remember what happened in states with the autocratic, undemocratic system.
I was born in the 60s, so I was born in Germany, which was divided not only by a wall, but an Iron Curtain. No? So it was, for us, an impenetrable border. Overcoming of borders, no? This is what the fall of the wall stands for, no?
When the wall came down, it was a fascinating time in 1989. I was with my very new girlfriend in a student hostel at this very time, and somebody was running on the floor and shouting, the wall fell. Die Mauer ist gefallen. But nobody really did believe it. The whole world turned upside down. Imagine everything changes. Nothing is the same anymore. The money is gone. The legal system is gone, the power is gone. The police is not acting anymore. Everything is new. You're completely blown out of your mind what's going on. And there was no power to close this wall again. So I drove home to my parents. And this, was the first and the last time ever in my life I saw my dad broke into tears when he saw how the ball came down. Because if you're come out of a dictatorship and you've come into an open society, there's a feeling you can't reproduce. Everything was possible.
The former Chancellor, West German Chancellor Willy Brandt, who was mayor of West Berlin when the wall was erected, spoke after unification about the division really only being over when people would no longer ask whether someone is a West German or an East German. And today there still are divisions, if you like, inner divisions in some parts of Germany or among some people in Germany between East and West.
What we are looking at today is potentially a new era in German politics.
Yeah, the percentages are here. The CDU won with 28%. Second came in the far right, the AfD with 20%. The Social Democrats fell from last time 25% to 16%. The Greens 11%, and then some small parties. So we have a very diverse Bundestag, and now they have had coalition talks. But the big chunk, the AfD, is a fraction, a party nobody wants to form a coalition with.
This refusal to work with right-wing authoritarian parties like the AfD has been a democratic norm since 1949. The Germans call it the firewall against the far right.
So the rest is left with each other, and they looked for a majority. And at the moment, the CDU, the Christian Democrats, and the Social Democrats are forming a coalition. The geographic distribution is interesting because after the election, got the map of Germany, and you saw the districts, and you saw almost exactly the former border between East Germany and West Germany. So in East Germany, everything was blue. In West Germany, it was mainly black and red, so CDU and SPD.
We saw the geographical divide, unfortunately. I'm pretty shocked that a far right-wing party, a party that wants to leave the European Union and wants to leave the Euro, that gained so much ground through an electorate that has actually lived in a dictatorship. And I would think that perhaps the historical knowledge or the continuous resonance of that would have been stronger.
It's the highest voter turnout since reunification.
But it's a really high participation.
Is that of registered voters, or is that of the
we don't have to register. So you are a voter. Once you turn 18 and you live in the country, you have a German citizenship, you can vote.
You know, Germany had 83% turnout in this election. I think if we got 83% turnout in the US, that would be like a 20% bump in overall turnout, which is crazy to think about. Just the level of participation they have here relative to us.
If you had to give German democracy a grade right now.
I think it's an interesting question because, as Charlotte said, it's good if we got a high voters turnout, for example, 83%, that's a record. On the other hand, AfD got quite a lot of votes. And you can have split opinions on that. You could say either people are represented, non-voters got back into the parliamentary system and voted for a parliamentary party, and that is good. Or you could be concerned just because this very party could be a danger to democracy in the long run.
I regard the German political system still as between A and B. I'm fully confident in the stability and the ability of resilience towards authoritarian threats and temptations.
The German system helps keep all of these parties in proportion rather than giving undue influence to a faction like the far right, which is growing, but overall is still a small portion of society.
One thing that Germany did very well, and the Americans were helpful with that, was the drafting of the Constitution. The 5% threshold in the electoral system is also very important when it comes to the influence of smaller parties and the situation that Germany faced right before the war with a gazillion amount of parties and simply the inability to take any decisions. This was the complete opposite of what the United States has. And I would say now the German system is somewhat right in the middle between the United States and what it had in the Weimar Republic.
What happened in Germany in the 1920s was that authorities were undermined, that trust in authorities, trust in media was undermined, that lies were spread. Lies about minority groups, lies about the political opponents were spread. That is one of the reasons why we have the laws that we have nowadays against lies on the internet, against the harassment, the hate speech. So that is the conclusion that we drew, and I strongly recommend that you guys take a lesson from that as well.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Yes, America was over the time of the Cold War, when I was behind the curtain, the beacon of hope. You brought us democracy after World War II. We saw America as a light, and the light dimmed a little bit. Maybe the light of the West, the idea of open society, shifted to Western Europe. We have to preserve this flame, especially since authoritarian regimes are taking over power all over the world.
So the German electoral system isn't flawless, but when compared to the American system, it has some big advantages. Gerrymandering isn't effective here. There's no such thing as a swing state that gets all the attention, and every voter feels like their vote actually matters. Wouldn't that be amazing in the US? My favorite teacher in high school was Mr. Hall, geometry. I love that class. Almost every week he would say, "You can't play the game if you don't know the rules." Of course, he was thinking about theorems and postulates and all of that, but as I'm older, I realize that his words apply just as much to democracy and elections.
What the Germans suggest to me is if you have better rules, you will get better outcomes. And that's a very valuable thing. Because we have lousy rules in the US, and that produces lousy outcomes.